or anything like that. Most of the beginning is a general overview, so I'm not sure how.
Yeah, we're not ready yet. Hold on. Yeah. We
He
might
said
give
it's 3 minutes out.
Let's
Oh,
wait.
wait.
Okay.
Did you want to wait? I'm sorry.
Yes,
Yeah, let's just wait. He's only
Wait,
waiting.
okay.
And did we still do roll call or did we?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. I am Councilwoman Sue Vanderpla and Chair of the Special Committee on the Environment and Resiliency. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 5:46. Can you please take the roll?
Chairperson Inderwall,
Here.
Vice Chairperson Sanchez is absent. Councilwoman Anthony,
present.
Councilman Espinal is absent. Councilor Roya is absent. Two present to be absent. We will have an informational meeting.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm really excited that today you're getting a presentation by Logan, who has been interning with our committee for this semester. and is a senior at Brown, is amazing. And I also acknowledge Professor Dawn King is in attendance via Zoom, who is his advisor at Brown for this class. So really excited to hear. And Logan, take it away. Thanks for presenting to us tonight.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Do you need help with your slides or anything, or are you good? Oh, yeah, I can do. Are you looking to do the, yes, presenter view?
Is that fine?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, there we go, yeah. And do you need me to do the thing, like, will they be able to hear him on Zoom if he sits there?
Yeah, he should be fine.
Okay, just don't
Just-
forget.
Please.
Okay. Okay, so thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. Over this past month, I've been working with Councilwoman Enderbois to do a high-level overview and also specific local.
Make a note, just want to acknowledge that Councilman Bryce has arrived. Thanks.
And we now have a quorum.
Yay.
Perfect. So today I will be going first over a history of plastic policy, then moving into challenges and opportunities that the city faces when reviewing plastic policy reform, going over 5 policy themes that I found specifically regarding case studies in different places in the United States and abroad that I think are useful in understanding these themes, and then implementation pathways in addition to our recommendations through those implementation pathways, and then some time for questions. Also, if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to ask me, no worries. Yeah. So, we are going to be first looking at federal policies and actions, a quick overview, then state level efforts, and then sort of local development things that have happened that you all might know about, or might not. So first, the federal government passed through the Biden administration sort of a strategy plan. So it wasn't passed through any legislative structure, but was written by the executive branch. And it was a task force preventing plastic pollution nationally. And there are 3 objectives. The first is to reduce pollution during plastic production. I would say that this is a little less of a focus for Rhode Island and Providence in specific, but the other 2 are very important. So objective B is to improve post-use materials management and to prevent trash and micro nanoplastics from entering waterways and removed from the escaped trash from the environment. I say all of this to frame what the federal action is, where plastic pollution is going, and where Providence should really focus its energy on. That sort of aligns with cross-cutting goals that exist outside of Providence as well. So like I said, objective B and C are pretty useful to understand as the broad policy context that's happening in the United States currently under this administration. So there are other one-off or currently unsuccessful federal efforts. This one-off example through the national parks, run through the Department of the Interior, has a phase out of any single-use plastic in national parks. So there are efforts to remove single-use plastic throughout the nation. There's also the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act of 2021. Unfortunately has not been passed and has been spinning federally. So I wouldn't put too much stake into it. However, it is something important to watch over when doing plastic reform and plastic policy at local levels. And this nationally structured bill focuses on microplastic and plastic pollution reduction, and the creation of a nationally structured bottle bill alongside other sort of mitigation strategies and health strategies. As I'll get into a little bit later, microplastics are concerned in terms of human consumption. So it also addresses some of those portions. There's also executive orders for the commitment to environmental justice and the recognition of pollution generally as a harm to historically marginalized groups. I say this importantly to once again frame this conversation. Plastic pollution disproportionately affects marginalized groups, even in Providence itself. Yeah, the other day I was walking down Broad Street and I saw so much waste on the side of the streets, but when I walk on Brown University's campus, that's not the case. And so there's a clear disproportionate impact that this is having on the city and how people live their lives and have a healthy environment. So it's very important to center that in the conversation. So that's a general overview of federal policies and action. We also have our Rhode Island state bills. I thought it was important to also talk about what's been happening at the state level. You all might be aware of some of these things. So first is the HB 7065, which was passed. And this is a plastic bag ban. It goes into effect for enforcement January 1st, 2024. There are, I would say, contentious beliefs about the positive impacts and negative impacts of the plastic ban. It's great that the state has made efforts to ban plastic bags. However, there is preemption laws, which I will also sort of preface it here, but get into what that means for us when we're planning policy reform for plastic. But preemption basically means that the state has an overview of this and no local or municipal action can be taken further than whatever the state passes, and that's written into the law. So for example, if Providence wanted to ban bags at farmers markets, they no longer can. And that is an issue that we're facing now because our previous bill, which I want to also get into, banned bags at farmers markets, but the state bill exempts farmers markets from having to get rid of plastic bags. So that's the issue with a bill like this, although it's created positive impacts because plastic bags are banned. Still unfortunate that some preemption challenges specific parts of the law in local spaces. There's also the straw giveaway ban. Once again, it's great that this ban is the basic overview is that it doesn't allow businesses to show straws that customers have to ask for straws. However, the enforcement of this is very weak in the state. I went into a restaurant the other day and just saw a straw sitting on the counter, and this ban, I believe, goes into effect. Yeah, it's already in effect. So it's supposed to be regulated by the Department of Health, but there are obviously challenges with that. Next, there's also the polystyrene ban, the foam ban that goes into effect also in 2024. We don't know what it will look like yet, so I don't have any feedback on it, but that's something to be aware of that's happening already. That's possibly somewhere that we can support local businesses in transitioning and figure out how to correct and enforce. And then lastly, it's unpassed but very prevalent in the state. There's the Rhode Island bottle bill. It's through Clean Water Action and Zero Waste Coalition. There's been a bottle bill that's been tried to pass at the state. And so it's just important to know that that effort is going on. There's currently a state commission that's happening. That is, I believe, a consortium of 18 individuals made up from a lot of sectors to talk about the bottle bill and what it means for Rhode Island. So it's also important to stay in tune with what's going on at the State House for this commission because it will directly impact what Providence will have to deliver if the bottle bill is passed or if it's not. So there was also, so outside of specific state bills, there was also the Rhode Island Task Force to Tackle Plastics in 2019 under Gina Raimondo's tenure as governor. And there are three main goals. I also say this to once again frame how people are perceiving and moving forward with state level policy. And people have already had these conversations, so it's important to know what experts are saying in the state on these topics. So the first goal that this force came up with was to eliminate plastic products in favor of reusable products. The next step after that, so goal one is obviously imperative, if impossible to eliminate, Then actually properly recycling and managing recycling is the next goal. And then the last goal is if elimination and recycling are impossible because some things are not able to be recycled, then being able to collect the remaining materials to avoid pollution in the environment, and making sure it gets out of our streets and out of our waterways. So that's sort of the tier of goals. Our first goal is obviously to get rid of plastic, but obviously in some cases, for example, like in medical settings, certain plastics are like limited. So you can't really get rid of that, and the disposal techniques are particular. So all of the goals are. In this task force, they also had some general suggestions for the state. The first suggestion was to create a green hospitality program. And while it doesn't have the name Green Hospitality Program, this was instated. And it's run through the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, currently called the Green Certification Program. This is important to note, just because Providence, I believe, can do more with this, and I'll explain in my recommendations. But it's important to know that there are some level of advocacy to get businesses on board with green certification, making sure that they're attempting to be more cognizant about their waste. They also noted to identify high impact MPAs. For us, it would more look like RFPs and RFIs, but still important nonetheless. Also they recommended to enhance technical assistance and professional development for businesses, including friendly graphics to understand and interpret all of these things. One simple barrier that can be challenged if there were friendly graphics is language barriers. Having friendly graphics in Spanish for businesses to understand these policies could mitigate a lot of the concerns with plastic that has already been banned. They also recommended laws to further pursue, including bottle bills, availability of recycling, extended producer responsibility for plastic packaging and food containers.
Just to pause you for a second.
Yeah.
Folks on Zoom, they're not seeing the slides advance. They're still seeing the first slide. I don't know if you shared funny. But let me just see it.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no, I don't know. I mean, we're seeing it, so you might have to play with this.
Yeah, go for it.
You might clarify.
No, that's better.
Hey, Justin. Yeah, a little tired.
Oh, appreciate it too. I just saw like rushing around like crazy.
What's that?
You're rushing around like crazy.
I do.
How's work?
Yeah, it's just-
Stop it off. Yeah, I had that on. I don't know.
They need, to school day, I might carry.
I can see that helps.
Pushing down.
Yeah.
I'm also happy to just, I mean, if this is the only way that they can see it.
Oh, okay.
Is it
It
good?
works.
Okay, let me try. Oh, wait, no.
So now just, oops.
Okay, does it work now? Is it advancing? Are they seeing the advancement?
Just waiting. Keep going.
Okay.
She sees woodsy, we're good. Yeah,
Did you see the new words
yeah.
popping up?
Cause he's adding them, yeah.
Anything popping up? I'm glad that.
Yes, she sees the words on the slide.
Great,
Yeah.
okay, perfect. I will continue that.
Thank
So
you.
like I was mentioning, the state task force recommended further laws to pursue bottle bills, availability of recycling, extended producer responsibility for plastic packaging and food containers. They also recommended to work in schools to disseminate and create awareness. The reason why I put was the owl is they recommended a similar campaign to excite students, excite young people about recycling. From personal experience, I know my roommates don't know how to recycle. So, which is, you would think, shocking. But yeah, just getting young people excited again about recycling, because I feel like a lot of the messaging now is that recycling is fake, it's a sham. which I think there can be improvements, but it doesn't mean that it's not important still to understand. And so, changing that rhetoric and being able to empower everyone through campaigns like this, might be useful for this, city and state to pursue. And like I said, use tools like Lidial, get people engaged. And then also support research and expansion of research and development. I think a little less important for, Providence itself. But yeah. And then to participate in the MacArthur Foundation Free Plastic Economy Initiative, unfortunately that study was already done. So it's a little bit past the timeline for that, but I thought it was still interesting to partner with private organizations or donors to help work on plastic reform in the city. So now, moving into Providence specific actions. So as you all might know, there was the plastic bag ban. Because of the state law and preemption, it's now technically all of the state's rules. So there's a little retraction of some certain parts of the bag ban. For example, like I mentioned, the farmers market, plastic bags will now be allowed in farmers markets. There's also the disposal of leaf and yard debris, which say you can't put your leaf and yard debris specifically in plastic bags. And there's also a very small laws that mention plastic. For example, there's a requirement of plastic identification cards for council members, which is a very interesting and small note. I don't know if that's something that can be changed, but the point of this is to emphasize that plastic is pervasive in almost all the policies that we think about, especially when it comes to procurement and physical items that we have. And so I'm imagining that, I mean, I didn't know about this either, but it is a requirement that IDs are in plastic. So just something to consider. In terms of the policies and how these policies are shared, Providence has an extensive collection of information that's really friendly and great graphics, and specifically about the bag ban policy and other sources of efforts for plastic reduction in the city. I think it's also important to ask ourselves how these information campaigns have been positively impacting individuals, and if these resources that the city has worked so hard to create are being used effectively. For example, we have image 1, which is, I think, and it's also offered in Spanish, but this says, 5 reasons Providence says no to using plastic bags, and it might be useful to keep using these sorts of very amazing resources to share about the bag ban. There's also, like I said, there's very clear information in Spanish. There's lots of availability of this information, dual language wise. There's also there's a whole section on guidelines for plastic bag bans. This also is just great, and like, how can we translate this information into friendly graphics that people can actually use? Like I said, plastic bags are being offered throughout the city. Enforcement for rules like and laws like these are quite challenging to regulate. So how can we empower citizens to feel like this law is really important and something that they care about, and this information that's readily available and already like consolidated can be used very effectively. Furthermore, there's also on the website a letter declaring for more, a letter informally committing the city to more efforts in reducing plastic waste beyond. So this isn't a conversation that hasn't been had in Providence, and I really want to emphasize that this isn't something that's revolutionary. This is something that other administrations in the past were thinking about really intentionally, and something that the city should continue to engage with intentionally. So I also wanted to talk about the specific plastic disposal in Providence, something that's really exciting about advocacy that can happen in Providence is that the city actually collects all of this plastic and is the main arbiter of how it moves through the system for specifically plastic disposal. So as you all probably know, the Rhode Island Resource Recovery Corporation constitutes the only landfill in Rhode Island, and it is the disposal service that DPW contracts with. And this provides service to pick up waste, including recycling. I wanted to give you some stats that I think are pretty eye-opening, to say the least. So, and these are all found on the Rhode Island Resource Recovery Corporation's website. 4,394 citations were the amount of citations the city faced in 2022 alone. And these citations total up to amount of fines in over $1.1 million for the city paying, which seems quite exorbitant, to say the least, that the city is wasting in terms of recycling failing. And the total recycling rate of diversion is 9.8%, which is by far the lowest in the state. And this was recycling rates in 2022. With the average waste profile being 1.3 tons per household per year, which is also one of the highest levels of waste production in Rhode Island. So it's one of the highest rates of production and one of the lowest rates of recycling. So there's so much work that can be done with recycling that will also save the city a lot of money. Very informally, I was discussing with the Department of Public Works, and they actually estimate this number to be higher than $1.1 million.
Logan, I'm sorry to interrupt, but just so I'm clear,
Yeah.
even the city's paying that.
Yeah.
Correct, yes, the city is paying that fee in recycling that gets rejected when delivered to the Rhode Island Resource Recovery Corporation.
So it's on top of all the tipping fees and everything we're already paying, it's just like all the fines for doing
Whoa.
that job.
That's something.
Yeah.
What I've heard from DPW is that when they essentially drop it off and it is the folks inspect, I guess, trucks.
Correct.
There's like no like clear methodology to like. So
Yes.
it's like the eyeball.
Yeah,
So, oh, this looks like there's a lot of
Correct.
items here that are not being properly recycled.
Yes.
So we're gonna, and I just think that is, yeah, very unfair,
Yeah.
there's gotta be a better way, maybe there's not. But it's certainly interesting the way they do that, it's like the eyeballing it.
Yeah, I'm happy that you brought that up. Actually, part of my presentation gets into that exact problem, and that also in communicating with the Department of Public Works when making this, that was mentioned that it's very indiscriminate in terms of like how loads are decided. It's very like humanistic, so those elements of rejection are very like subjective.
Right.
And so I'll get into this a little bit later, but for some of the recycling programs that other cities have, there's actually AI technology that can sort through these recyclings to determine whether or not they can be recycled or not. So it removes that human element. I'm not too, and as I'll mention in this presentation, I'm not personally an expert in AI, so I by no means know exactly what the systems look like or the programs or technology or costs, but it is a recommendation for the city to possibly bring in an expert who knows this and can possibly work to make the system better, because the amount of funds that the city is losing is already exorbitant, and something can be changed about that. It's not something that the city can't do anything about. There's also the fact that I'll also get into this, but composting is often the change between whether recycling can be accepted or not. A lot of times food waste is the reason why recycling isn't processed. And so having separate composting usually also increases recycling concurrently. So waste diversion overall increases by a lot by having that extra stream of composting separated from our general waste. So just some things to keep in mind, and I will get into some case studies that really dive into that. Also, another shocking statistic that I was personally surprised by and thought it was fake. There are zero amounts of times that there were outreach and education done for recycling in 2022 reported by the Rhode Island Resource Recovery Corporation in Providence. This does not include nonprofits or any sort of, like, for example, the Rhode Island School Recycling Clubs Network. They're doing great work on the ground, but in terms of state level or city level integration of education and outreach for recycling that's reported by the corporation, there's nothing. But there's amazing resources that do exist that the city has promoted previously, and does exist that already consolidated. For example, you can see, you know, the Department of Public Works has put a lot of time and effort into making the website really accessible. But how can this information then be actually disseminated and pushed out to the city? For example, what can I recycle in my bin? It's a great little paragraph about what you can recycle. There's also overflow trash bag purchase locations, which is something that's important for keeping trash out of the environment. I personally did not know any of this until I looked it up on the website as a resident who lives in an apartment here.
So I think that there's part of the contract with RIRC requires them to do some education, as I
Yeah.
recall.
That's something to look into. Crystal and Sly used to do that, and she left.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if it's required, like, only like in a specific portion of when it is. I'm also uncertain about how frequently the contracts are signed.
Yeah.
But that a stipulation could have been, I only looked at data in 2022, so it could be that there were outreach done previously.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a weird mess, yeah.
But this is from the Rhode Island Resource Recovery Corporation, and I'm happy to get that particular information. It's in my plastic brief.
Okay.
So if you're more interested in diving into it, yeah, I'm more than happy to send that over.
thank you.
Yeah. So, pretty shocking, and I mean, as all of you definitely know, Providence is 17% of the total population, so that's a huge amount of Rhode Island that's missing out on this critical recycling education. So next, I'm gonna dive into some challenges and opportunities that the city may face in plastic reform. There's first constraint, so some of the challenges, one is constraint over source, so there's a problem about the geographic range that the city has control in. And it might be impossible to have weight over specific decisions. So for example, if river pollution is happening up the Providence River outside of the jurisdiction of Providence, it's very challenging for the city to have any meaningful impact in those sorts of decision-making structures. There's also a restraint in the decision-making itself. So municipalities don't always get to decide what to follow and not. A perfect example of this is the plastic bag ban and preemption. And also the straw ban. So cities have to follow state regulations, as I'm sure, and federal regulations, although there hasn't been many plastic reform regulations that have went on at a federal level, unfortunately. It's not necessarily an impossibility, to say the least. There's also certain failures of systems due to political turnover, changes of position, and general unforeseen factors, just the fact that there has to be, you know, trash picks up every week, system failures can occur. For example, unfortunately, the recycling rates are abysmally low, lowest in the state, and that's not to the fault of anyone who's picking up this trash, and it's also not the citizens. It's more that the system really hasn't been investigated and been talked about in really meaningful ways. And I think that's the conversation that's important. How to empower both residents to start doing this and also really highlight and move forward the things that the Department of Public Works has found successful, and how the city can be helpful in that movement. So some opportunities, there's a lot of policy build-off potential, because there's, for some regulations that don't have preemption, there is the ability for the state to build off of policy that's already been passed on the state level, which is really exciting. And I forgot to change this, but preemption does not allow that. Fortunately, I met with a lawyer before this who was able to explain the system. So unfortunately, plastic bag ban is very difficult to build off policy, but I'll get into that. later as well. So there's also the ability for flexibility and tailored design. So it can be some policies can be very sweeping. But the municipality has a real ability to target specific areas, have targeted outreach, and targeted intervention. So there can be pollution specific solution identification. If there's like a specific place in the city that a lot of plastic pollution is happening, there can be a focused and targeted area with policies that support that specific area, which can't necessarily happen on the state level or federal level that are very general. There's also the Providence State Office of Sustainability. That's not the case everywhere, and I think as you all probably work with the Office of Sustainability, there's amazing people who work in there. Also, Kevin was kind enough to meet with me to talk about all these things previously. So they're all amazing, and there's lots of potential in that. So as I was moving through researching, I found 5 main policy themes with case studies that I think really reflect policy movements throughout the United States with plastic reform. First is recycling and waste management. The next is single-use plastic and styrofoam. Following that could be microplastics and water pollution. There's also plastic in industry, and then plastic in healthcare. So for recycling and waste management, I decided to look at a specific city that has shown particular success, the city of San Francisco. And in 2009, they had a mandatory recycling and composting ordinance that was passed. And when I was looking through this, there's so many articles that go over the success of San Francisco, but I wanted to know why. And so while I was reading through it, some things that really stuck out to me in the ordinance itself is that ordinances were collated in an environment code, that the city really focused and had a department that focused on these codes in a centralized location. There were also other policies linking all of the sustainability goals that the city had set. For example, the 2007 food waste reduction ordinance. They also really focused on individual preconceptions of waste management, and it was a central concern. So what I mean by this is, how do citizens interact with recycling on a day-to-day? What is the color of the bin that they're looking at, and does that signal recycling? Does that signal composting? And so these things are very important when creating systems and structures. When you think about human failure, human interaction, and human decision making. So there's a little bit of psychology that goes into all of this. There was also structured and enforceable penalties, and this was through the adequate refuse collection service, through the Department of Health that had a specific regulatory body that did ticketing, and worked with citizens through this ticketing process. I also wrote a lot more about it in my brief. I didn't want to get into too much detail, but I'm more than happy to send that along to talk about it in more detail if you're interested in enforcement specifically. There was also establishment of public feedback for this ordinance, and there was a timeline that the project had with the ordinance passed. So it included sort of the structure of time and how this ordinance was to play out over time. I also wanted to mention the timeline of this. I think it's really important and something that I will get into in my recommendations. In 2002, the city of San Francisco set a 75% diversion rate. And this was a diversion of trash from landfills by 2010, which is actually very pertinent in Rhode Island right now because the Rhode Island Resource Recovery Corporation is the only landfill. And according to their calculations, there's not a lot of space left. And so, timing in terms of like the space that's going to be occupied by the amount of trash that is created in Rhode Island, those resources for land are decreasing by the days and years. So it is something that's really on the mind, or should be on the mind for health, and specifically Providence. There also passed, like I mentioned, the Food Waste Reduction Act, which instituted a specific focus on composting. I believe it also included education and outreach, and so that was a really important portion of it. And then in 2009, they passed the mandatory recycling and composting ordinance with a timeline that followed it. So you can see that this didn't happen overnight. And I think that's what I really want to emphasize. I will not, in my recommendations today, tell you to do a mandatory recycling and composting ordinance. If you did it today, I think it would fail immensely. In my honest opinion, I think it's about creating effective timelines and being able to see this move forward and set goals and targets and have achievable targets over time that lead up to something like a program that is recycling and composting that's mandatory. And also just 5 key pillars of success and why the overall implementation of the program was successful. First, it offered a highly convenient service. They also had financial incentives to recycle food waste. So they also had the enforcement, but they also had incentives. So it's double jeopardy, which is usually helpful in moving forward both businesses and people in being a part of these programs and processes. There was also legislation specifically mandating it, like I mentioned, the ordinance. And the delivery of this information was through education. So they didn't initially mandate anything. There was a long stretch of education and outreach and getting people excited about these things and really wanted composting for the benefit of them as a resident. And there's also very strong partnerships with nonprofits, businesses to deliver the program. It's really important to understand that each sector of engagement will look differently. The way that you talk to businesses will look a lot different than the way you talk to residents. Will look a lot different than the way you talk to nonprofits who are engaging in this work. But it's important to create strong relationships and partnerships with all of these individuals.
Yeah.
What were the financial incentives for the residents or businesses to recycle the food waste?
Yeah, I think the program itself included, so during the 2007 movement, they had specific programs that help businesses transition over to composting. And then also in that vein, when you divert the food waste separately, you can also increase your recycling capacity and rate, and then that recycling can generate financing. So a lot of the recycling programs, you can sell all of your recycled materials, and with a structured system that has like a large volume, you can often get really good rates of return from selling it to businesses. So having improved composting can improve recycling, and those programs were incentivized, I think specifically for businesses. But I'm uncertain, and I'll do more research on the household aspect of it. But I at least know, like, for example, back in where I live for Wisconsin, people are able to like recycle aluminum cans and like turn it in and then get money back. So like something like a bottle bill. But all of this integrated in itself. So making sure that the city so that residents in the city understand that composting can actually increase all of these things. And I believe as well, your waste costs go down. So like the financial incentive is more like a savings of the waste that you're producing. Because a lot of like farms, for example, want composting. They'll use it for feed for livestock, and you can divert it instead of having to pay the landfill to get rid of your waste. So, and that also goes back to the strong partnerships. So are there farms around here that would be willing to take large amounts of, composting that could divert a really big cost for businesses and also benefit farmers? So something like that. It's important to think about how all the systems are very interconnected when discussing waste diversion, waste itself, recycling, and composting.
Just to add on with Logan, so I worked in San Francisco between 2006 and 2011, and it was just like, yeah, obviously we built out a new but my organization built out like a new building at that point. All the composting infrastructure was just like part of it, like it was just like, well, obviously, like it was actually just like everywhere. It started in like 08, 09, or 09, 10.
What's the population of San Francisco?
800,000?
Yeah, okay, so bigger, but.
Yeah, and I think there are positives and negatives for it being larger and small. So like I think it's still very manageable at the size that Providence is.
And also very neighborhood.
Yeah.
So next we have single-use plastic and styrofoam. I wanted to go over a case study with Washington DC, specifically Bill 2010 B-150. And this bill basically set a standard for DC in its specific neighborhood to enforce a tax on plastic bags and bags generally. It's called the bag tax. And I will say, funny enough, I was in DC while writing this and making this slide, and I went out to a restaurant and I got charged this bag tax, and I thought it was very funny. As I was writing about the bag tax. So the bill banned disposable non-recyclable plastic, which has already happened. But it also establishes a fee on other types of bags and bag usage. Specifically, and I think uniquely, this bill diverted all of this money towards the Anacostia River Cleanup and Protection Fund, which I think is the important emphasis on this structure. And I think that's why it succeeded. And you may ask if it succeeded. After the fee started, within months, officials released figures showing a drop from a reported 22.5 million bags being used per month to 3.3 million. So there's a real sizable difference that a bill or an ordinance like this could make, not only for reducing plastic bags, but also if diverting funds specifically can go towards environmental and climate resilience, which is exactly what the city is striving for, especially with the climate justice plan and all the targets that are trying to be met. I also wanted to mention, so for example, they also, with the funding, they gave a lot of effort in education and outreach, and making citizens excited about this program. So for example, they partnered with the Department of Motor Vehicles to make this license plate that was about river protection, and people could, have it proudly. And I think having insignias that are like attached to bills like these is really important. It pushes for individuals to be really excited about all of these efforts. So for the timelines, I really want to emphasize timelines once again. I don't think all of this happens overnight, and I'm not trying to insinuate that, which is why I add these timelines. In 2008, DC had a trash study. This study was done by volunteers gathering community science data, and then it was put together by city officials similar to the Office of Sustainability. So that could be something that would be useful, specifically in identifying target areas in the city on where trash is escaping the trash stream. And then from this study and all of this information that was collected, it really put the impetus on the city to push forward a bag tax law. And this was instituted in 2010, but passed in 2009. And it's still into effect today. The city has collected millions of dollars in funds to go towards projects, also funding salaries of people who are focused on this effort. And it's also led to further initiatives. So it really impacted foam-free DC. Which was law building off previous work to ban foam. And once again, we do have a polystyrene ban, which is great on the state level. So similar actions, and then it moved to the Sustainable DC 2.0 plan, which is similar to our climate justice plan, which was future planning by Mayor Bowser off of all of this amazing work that had been done. And I mentioned these points to say that Rhode Island is already on this track.
Yeah.
So we can definitely implement something like a bag tax law with obviously oversight and connections and partners, with figuring out all the logistics, but it's not unreasonable because cities like DC have done it. So next is plastic and healthcare. We have King Abdullah University Hospital in Jordan produced 1,433 pounds of plastic waste per day when considering only an occupation of 95 COVID-19 patients, which is an insane amount of plastic production. And while we are I wouldn't say necessarily super post-COVID, but post the heightened part of the pandemic, a lot of these rates are similar. There actually, from my research, hasn't been any studies done in the United States about plastic and healthcare and the systems, which is why I really want to bring it up. Also in California, Spain, and China, medical waste increased by an increment of 350 to 370%. So it's a real issue. However, there has been research done about how policymakers and systems and project management can work with the healthcare system to make these plastics smaller in number and have them be some reusable or at least improve waste diversion. So one of the systems, for example, would be medical plastics being used, the proper disposal, sterilization, sorting and segregation, then actually working to recycle it properly, and then having those recycled products which go back to being used as medical plastics. So this is a very simplified version, but there are systems that have been studied. I can talk more about this, but there's lots of options that policymakers and individuals who work in both healthcare and policy and plastic have come up with solutions that are not out of the realm of possibility for the city of Providence to engage with. We also have plastic in industry, and I really want to go over two general ideas in plastic and industry that are being championed throughout the United States right now, specifically in Rhode Island as well, very pertinent. There's the bottle bill, which I'll cover, and there will also be the extended producer responsibility program, which I'll cover in the next slide. And this is specifically regarding Maine's system. I also have some information about Oregon, not in this presentation, but in my brief, that you can do a little digging in if you're interested in. So for this bottle bill, in Maine, there's a 15-cent refundable deposit on spirit and wine beverage containers, and then a 5 cent refundable deposit on beer, hard cider, wine coolers, soda, non-carbonated beverages, and other drinks sold within the state. The beverages that are not covered, so it doesn't include all beverages, but some that are not covered include milk or dairy-derived products, Maine-specific apple cider and blueberry juices, liquid syrup, seafood meat, and broths, instant drink powders, and then anything consumed in a frozen state. So there's obviously stipulations to this, but overall the idea is that most bottles that are being used by consumers are being charged. The consumers are being charged. And how it actually works is the manufacturers they collect the 5 cents when sold at the store, and all of these bottles have tags specifically for the bottles that they produce. Then there's the retail outlet that can collect them back and pay the consumer back for what they charged, for what they were charged originally. Yeah, they recover it, and they can be at either licensed redemption centers or specific stores. I can talk more about the logistics of the Maine system. But the redemption center then takes those bottles, recycles them, and also receives a handling fee from the state. So there's a lot of moving parts in the system, and all bottle bills actually function a little bit differently through state to state. I'm happy to talk more about it after the presentation, like the specificity of each of the bottle bills and what it can look like. But this is actually the conversations that are going on right now in the commission in Rhode Island. So it's really important to be aware of like what a bottle bill actually means and what the implications are for a city like Providence. There's also extended producer responsibility, which is not currently being talked about. But Maine was the first state to pass extended producer responsibility. This is actually a very popular program in foreign countries. A lot of Europe has extended producer responsibility. And basically the idea is that the responsibility of packaging will then be extended, hence the name, to corporations. And so they'll be required to dispose of it. And all EPRs look a little differently depending on where you are. And I wish I could give you more information about the specific structure in Maine, but they're actually going through debates right now. They're inviting speakers and trying to figure out systems and doing public feedback and comment right now. So I recommend that Providence stay tuned to all of this really important information that's going on. So at the very least, the city of Providence can be informed about what extended producer responsibility in the United States looks like. Basically, how it works abroad as a very general overview is eco-modulation. So each product that is used, businesses would have to pay, specifically, a target amount based on the amount of pollution that a specific product produces. So if something is really, really bad for the environment, the industry would have to pay more for that, for using that specific item versus something that's less environmentally harmful. So if it's like polystyrene foam, which is banned in most of Europe anyways, but it's say that's something that's really bad for the environment versus like recycled paper, those would cost differently. They would be eco-modulated depending on the amount of environmental impacts they have. And so that's usually how EPR systems are set up. There's also in Oregon, there's the EPR bill and bottle bill, which are Oregon and Maine are a lot of what the United States looks for when it comes to plastic reduction and general information about how to work with industry on reducing waste. So if the city was considering any movement, staying really tuned into Maine and Oregon is important. And then our last section is microplastics and water pollution. There's actually no particular case studies done in the United States or anywhere to find really, but there is an overview by the OECD to cover some important things about microplastic and water pollution that policymakers should be engaged with. So first, there's design and management. The OECD recommends to improve manufacturing and design to reflect less plastic use in eco-design. There's also use phase, so how to actually use the products themselves and the maintenance themselves better. Then there's end of life, which is how we choose to throw it away and recycle it. I would say my project mostly focuses on that. And the most important, in my opinion, for microplastics specifically, that I'll make a recommendation on later, is the end of pipe plastic. So there's actually a research study done by URI, Victoria Rose recently released about the Narragansett Bay that talks about microplastic pollution, which is really damaging, to say the least. And so I think the city would be well off to engage in conversations about improved municipal wastewater management and improved management of stormwater runoff to decrease microplastic pollution in our water sources. And that's something that international organizations are asking and calling upon local and state level policymakers to focus on. So in terms of this section, implementation pathways, my goal is to talk about four specific pathways that the city can make plastic reform in, and then talk about my recommendations generally in each of them. So first we have procurement, so how the city actually gets its plastic. So this would be examining things like MPAs and RFPs. We have our regulatory ordinances, so how the city actually manages plastic legally. For example, like a plastic bag ban or a tax. Procedural, so this is more like your informal structure, so how the city actually proceeds. So this is like conversations with the Department of Public Works, how the sustainability office engages in education outreach, that's not through policy necessarily, and then structurally. So this is how the city decides to move through in structural changes. So this could be like municipal wastewater treatment plants, anything through the zoning and building board of review, things like that. So first, for procurement, my first idea for the city to engage in is identify a list of high-level RFI and RFPs that produce high plastic output. This can be done in a timeline of about 6 months. And the funding for this could be a student hiring, it could be an unpaid or paid partnership with, for example, Brown University Square Center, Roger Williams, URI. There's tons of students who love doing work like this, myself included, who I think would be great to engage with and get some good experience in doing plastic reform and diving into this. The second idea is to plan for long-term recycling and the RFI and RFP to include a shift to mandatory recycling and composting. And I would say this is probably a timeline of 5 to 7 years based on the example of the city of San Francisco. The funding is obviously having a composting program, so the expansion of that, and then also staff time to actually like collect labor, all of it. But there have been grants that have been pursued by the city. And I also urge the city to consider the offset that the recycling would have. So like I said, there's $1.152 million that are being wasted per year when we don't have effective recycling that happens. So that could also be a way to compensate for some of this extra cost for the composting program and expansion of staff. There's also, I just wanted to mention and be realistic because I've had conversations with the Department of Public Works. Some things to keep in mind is enforcement issues because of labor and also problems with rats. Just, you know, being completely transparent. So having these conversations is really important to consider those factors. But there are examples of a great integrated system that challenge these. For example, in Connecticut, there's like a double truck, you could say, that's going through, and it's recycling and composting in the same truck with a divider that's in between. And they're just having this program be deployed. I'll also mention that right now DPW is going through their opt-in composting program that they received from a federal grant. So I would recommend staying tuned into that, and also that is the first step, I believe, in planning for a long-term shift. So if the city can also work, and I'll mention this in my more in my other policies, that education and outreach is an important tandem responsibility for the city to partner with. And then we have our regulatory policies. So the first, and I think most important that I urge the city to do over, I think, any, and I think is the most accomplishable, is setting a diversion rate for recycling, or just generally waste diversion. This timeline is 6 months, and all the funding that's needed is your time to get this passed and work with partnerships. I really think that this is the first step to move cities like San Francisco towards meeting these really lofty goals that the climate justice plan, which are amazing and we really want to get to, but we need on the ground things that policymakers and everyone in the city is held to, and waste diversion is one of the easiest ways to reduce waste in the city, and be that starting point to start moving towards these goals. The second idea is the Providence bag tax, similar to Washington, D.C., and setting up an environmental project fund specifically for all the funds that are collected. And with this recommendation, I think there's a lot of communication that needs to happen. For example, preemption is a concern. The policy, I read through it, quote unquote, says regulation, and what regulation for preemption means could be very vague. I would imagine it's very clear to say that Providence could not go on and ban bags from farmers markets, but having a tax is a gray area, I would say. So it might be really impactful for the city to pursue this and see if it is an option with preemption, because I'm not a legal expert. But for me, it falls into gray area. It might be something, in my opinion, really worth the city pursuing. I also will recommend that if this path were to be pursued, meeting with the Racial and Environmental Justice Committee to talk about the real implications of this. I think there are ways to make sure that this program is designed for impacting and making a real change in disadvantaged communities in Providence. Like, for example, the fund could be particularly set up towards these identified areas of environmental justice in the city. That's just one, small way that I would think about making this equitable. Next, exploring an extended producer responsibility program. I think this timeline would definitely be longer, 5 to 7 years. For the actual ordinance itself, funds would not be needed. However, I'll get into sort of a secret third structural policy recommendation that I have that will partner with the extended producer responsibility program to actually make it effective, which means that Providence, if it decided to be innovative, could pursue a system of recycling that it supports for businesses specifically. And finding a facility and a place to site all of this recycling that Providence specifically runs to help businesses and incentivize them for joining on to these sorts of programs. Also idea number 4, banning single-use, single-serving water bottles and nips, and also writing a letter of support if the state decides to move forward with the bottle bill after this commission happens. This is a timeline of about 18 to 24 months. A lot of the funding would just be enforcement, and there also are cities in Rhode Island that have banned single-use, single-serving water bottles. For example, Barrington. And there's also been bans that happened in the New England area, all in, once again, if you're interested more in the logistics of that, it's in my brief. I didn't want to get too in-depth with it because of timing. For procedural policies, I recommend an incentivization of creativity within waste management. Once again, there's no real funds necessarily needed in this process. It's more a conversation. So I recommend that the Department of Public Works be brought into one of these meetings to have a conversation about their systems and structures, and maybe get some public feedback through this panel and through hopefully individuals who come to talk about challenges that they face and how systems can be improved. For example, the DPW could show their routing systems, and maybe there's some collective wisdom that exists from other departments that could improve that system and that routing. Could talk about education and outreach. There's a lot of things that can happen when the doors are open to conversation. Next is the idea that the city should expand education and outreach for recycling. So the Office of Sustainability received a USDA grant that is currently doing education and outreach for composting. And I discussed with Kevin through the Office of Sustainability that recycling could be a very small portion of education through that targeted education. And so I recommend that the city work with that grant to improve both like the recycling component that also relates to the composting. And then as well as, if possible, really push for education and outreach in tandem with the composting education that's happening right now in the city, and invite speakers in like the Rhode Island School Recycling Club to talk about their work and how the city can effectively support these amazing programs that are going on in the city. So the last idea is sort of an expansion on the green certification program, some sort of expansion that could be a conversation with businesses on what they're looking for that would make people excited about improved systems in the city. This timeline would be probably 12 to 24 months. And most of the funding needed for a program like this for the city of Providence to expand on a program like the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management is running, would be staff to review the applications, the site visits themselves to approve, and then also including the creation of materials for the application. I would recommend, I was unfortunately not able to dive into the Department of Environmental Management program deeply for the specific program, but it would be a great opportunity to see what resources are available and how the city can expand those programs using the resources that are already available by the Department of Environmental Management. Even if that means not creating a new program, but how to advertise that green certification program, because I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
And it seems like a pretty cool program from the very brief look that I've done at it. Lastly, structural policies, I think these are where I also fall short in terms of funding, but it might be something that you all have expertise in. So my first idea is to really focus on increasing capacity for microplastic filtration in wastewater systems. An example of that is if there is a renovation that's happening with a wastewater treatment plant or something along those lines, making sure that microplastic filtration is included in a part of that renovation, I think would be highly critical and something that the city should advocate for. I'm imagining that this timeline, once again, is not overnight, renovations don't happen overnight, it also would likely be a significant portion of money to do something like this. So I imagine that the timeline is something like 10 years, but a conversation that should be engaged in now to then set up for success later. The second idea that I had was focusing on increasing gray and green infrastructure projects, and I know it's already happening in the city. So as Councilor Enblatt informed me, there's a Bloomberg project on green and gray infrastructure for stormwater management, which can reduce microplastic pollution. And so I recommend that there be a concerted effort for the Environmental Resilience Committee to be a part of this process. And advocate in any way to improve green and gray infrastructure throughout the city. Once again, I imagine this is not going to happen overnight, timeline is 7 to 10 years, but staying tuned with how this project, I believe there's also research being done in the city first. So staying in tune with that research, and maybe this council could be a way for public input and feedback to be collected, have these individuals come in, and really advocate for ordinances and structural policies that push for this action. And as a secret third that I didn't add on here, I was recently talking with a business individual who runs a business here and does a lot of zero waste efforts. It was yesterday, and so I was able to add it. But I thought it was really important to recognize is that Providence can be really innovative in the way that it engages with businesses in waste reduction. So pursuing an idea like having a recycling plant and working with businesses to incentivize moving their recycling through that program, working on bottle bills, extended producer responsibility to sort of funnel all of it through a specific site and facility that businesses can possibly like run. There are other state systems like Oregon that have independent systems that businesses and industry get really excited about because they make money off these recycling programs. So I really recommend the city invest in conversations at the very least about finding places for recycling to go that are from the city that can be a centralized location, especially since the Rhode Island Resource Recovery Corporation will be running out of land within the next 5 to 10 years. And that's somewhere that Providence could really be innovative and make strides and connect with business partners to hear about what would incentivize them to participate in programs like these that can make recycling rates significantly better, save the city money, and there would definitely be a return on rate for Providence if a business analysis was done. So yeah, I think with that, I end my presentation. If you have any questions, I'm happy to field it. Otherwise, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Logan, and before you run out, oh yeah.
I'm just something.
I want to say like 2 things. One is he mentioned a brief a few times, which I meant to send you last night, but I think I never hit send on the email, so you'll have it in your box. Right? He did an excellent job of reviewing that, so you'll have that. And then I also wanted to highlight, we spent a lot of time talking with a lot of folks in the city and then other stakeholders. This wasn't just like internet research, which there was some of that, but it's like Moses, Kevin Croft, DPW, Go and Al, like lots of Ocean State Job Lot, like talked to a lot of people. And I also want to point out, so we had a first semester, this is his second big project with us. He also wrote the Vision Zero resolution that'll be on probably December 7th.
Wow.
Agenda. So I just want to
Thank you.
pump him up a little bit.
Wherever you work is gonna be very lucky. I have to say, you've given, sorry, I have to run out somewhere I have to be, but I'll tell you, you've given me all of us.
Yeah,
a lot to think about.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, this is great stuff, so I appreciate all that, and I look forward to reading that.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And I'm happy to continue engaging in conversations. Feel free to send me an email. There is another slide. Just so that way
Oh yeah, you have his email address.
Okay.
I wanted to go to the next slide, so that way, I think on here, my email address is.
Yeah, we have it, and
Feel free to reach out to me with any questions as you read through the brief. If you have any more research that you want me to do on anything to add to the brief, I'm also more than happy to do that. If you feel like I missed something.
we're gonna discuss.
Yeah, we'll discuss that next steps. And I'll get you.
What's that? Really good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, Justin, do you have more questions?
Yeah, and you may have already explained this, honestly, I'd be a very transparent, I'm working towards my third cup of coffee soon.
Oh, no,
There.
it's almost that.
Yeah. So. I know Maine has the bottle program, which seems to be very successful. Any like municipal bottle programs in the country? So like, let's say that a state's not doing it,
Can we do
but
it?
yeah, essentially could we do it?
So that's something that I really battled with. The reason why I originally had a recommendation on a voluntary program that the city could run. So I don't have any formal research on it, but like I said, I live in Wisconsin and there was like a local place where I could voluntarily give it, like donate these things. The recycling like building that was run by the municipality actually like sold these, so they made money on it and they gave money to someone like me who turned in like an aluminum can and I got like 2 cents or something, where they're making like 7 cents reselling all this material to whoever wants it in bulk, but from like all the residents and businesses that like support it. So there are ways that I think the city can voluntarily integrate itself. The reason why I hesitate right this moment is that the commission for the bottle bill is happening right now. And so I would maybe wait until the outcome of that from the commission is decided and a bill is either pushed through or not in January when the new session starts. And if it's not, then I would recommend that the city move forward in a voluntary program. But that's also why I said the city should sign on a letter of support to the state bottle bill, because then it would be easier to manage it and have like a state program.
Right.
But this gets at the same idea of my structural policy recommendation that the city really needs to look at spaces and facilities in the city that would be useful for something like a redemption center, something where businesses could sort of centralize all of the recycling that's happening so they can make a good profit. Because what I heard from talking with businesses is that the best way to make profit is to have both, to be able to have a high enough volume that the individuals who are buying all of this product would be really interested in buying it, and market prices fluctuate. I think like from what the individual I was talking to said, like day to day, but like month to month. So like all of these things definitely change, but there are ways to do like an analysis of how much money businesses could make, how much the facility siting would cost, and then balance that out and how the city can participate in that program and make money. So for going back to like the specific question about bottle bill, I would really stay honed in on the state commission. See what happens, and if they don't, then pursue voluntary bottle deposit that, you know, the city can run and make some money off.
It's a, I think a great idea. As far as like redemption, did you say redemption?
Correct, redemption centers.
I feel like it would get some nibbies on
Yeah,
that, you know,
there must be some place.
but
But
I think, I feel like potentially a whole industry can be,
Yeah,
you know, spawned from a bottle program, you know, like. Yeah.
And that's one of I think one of the opportunities that I don't know if I really emphasized. But if Providence makes efforts and changes, you know, we are 17% of the island. So, you know, programs like these could push the state for doing, you know, and if the success is shown of something like a voluntary, you know, bottle bill sort of pilot program, that, you know, it might be worth it for the state to invest in something like that and really push forward legislation.
yeah,
And I think there could easily be like a student or someone who works with the zoning board or like whoever
yeah.
in the city has like ideas about like vacant properties or something like that, that the city could pursue. Which could be like a double solution, you know, like get some vacant properties back up and running and provide like, you know, stimulation in specific places. And also serve as a centralized location for people. To deliver those recycling items.
Any other questions, Justin?
No, this is a great look. Thank you for this.
Of course.
So thorough, right?
Happy to.
I learned a lot, seriously.
And we-
I'm glad.
We have, a member of public here, but we also have a member of public on Zoom. I don't know, I just texted Dawn to see if she has any questions. Did you raise her hand or not?
I can promote her to a panelist.
Oh, yeah, would you mind promoting her just because she doesn't have a question? Oh, hey, Dawn, we just wanted to see if you had any questions or comments.
I don't have any questions, but I do have a comment,
You
like,
unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Oh, no.
oh,
Oh, remuted.
can you hear me now?
Is something on our end?
Is our volume up? That's a silly question, but.
Is it either
Yeah.
on the computer?
Oh,
No, it's on the computer.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you might need to like change the settings of volume. It might be attached to the speaker, which doesn't have.
Yeah, we, like, normally people should participate on Zoom. I feel like this committee is like.
Oh, no.
Yeah, she says she's not muted on her end. Oh, no.
let me mute them.
Maybe it's something about the audio.
Can you hear me now?
settings.
Can you hear me?
Is there
Yeah, but there's a requirement for plastic.
Yeah. So you have it. You must have.
And so should the sound coming from the owl then? There's two functions on the like mute, you can do like the output and.
Yeah,
Right?
but. Yeah, maybe if you try, that's about
Hello?
John, can you try now?
Can you hear me?
Oh, there's like a. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, maybe you can try. Okay, that's just us. Okay, well, she is texting.
Oh.
Oh, can we hear?
Yep.
Wait,
John,
can
are
you hear me?
there?
Can you hear me?
Oh, one sec, we're almost there.
Do you just wanna call her maybe?
I'm trying again. Can you hear me?
Okay, she says no worries, and her comment is, this was an amazing presentation, by Logan, it's really informative. She wanted you to know.
Very much.
Okay, we will figure out, this committee is playing by Grant, did you have any questions or comments for Logan?
Looking forward to your next meeting.
Great,
I would like a copy of her.
oh, yeah,
So,
Claire, or,
Yep, we have plenty.
we have so many copies,
next.
awesome.
And this, of course, is up on the portal too.
Yeah, and it's up on the portal, and I'll, email you around as well, so that's it. Awesome, well, it is an informational meeting because Councilman Anthony is gone, so we can just adjourn informally, we can just,
We'll just close.
go about our lives, yeah.
It's kind of like unplugged, as it's.
Yeah. But thank you, Logan, this was amazing, you did such a good job, and
Thank
I'm
you.
excited for what we did next, so I think we'll have a mind meld as a committee on what some of the next steps could be.
Yeah, and like I said, if you have any questions, want me to do more research and add to the brief. I will also say that I have links to everything that I talked about in the actual brief that Councilman Anderball sent around. So that also may be helpful, just so that we have it there.